The dense forests of Nagaland stretched endlessly, their emerald canopy whispering with the wind. Otto, a young hunter, moved silently through the undergrowth, his bow gripped tightly in his calloused hands. He had been tracking an injured deer since sunrise, but as the sun dipped behind the hills, a thick mist curled around the trees, turning the familiar forest into an unfamiliar maze. Otto hesitated. He knew these lands well, but something felt different tonight. The usual chatter of insects had ceased, the air heavy with an eerie stillness. He pressed on, his heart pounding, the faint tracks of the wounded animal leading him toward a stream he did not recognize. Its water shimmered under the moonlight, unnaturally silver. He knelt to drink, the cool liquid easing his parched throat. As he rose, a presence stirred behind him. A woman stood at the water's edge. Her long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and she wore a flowing garment adorned with intricate patterns unknown to Otto. Her ornaments glimmered, catching the moonlight in an unnatural way. Yet it was her eyes that held him captive, deep, endless, and filled with something ancient. "You should not be here," she said, her voice as soft as the rustling leaves. Otto tensed but did not reach for his bow. "Who are you?" he asked. She tilted her head, studying him as though deciding whether to answer. Lawanu. He had never heard the name before. Something in the way she stood, unblinking, as if she belonged to the forest itself, unsettled him. And yet, there was no fear in her gaze, only curiosity. "I lost my way," he admitted, glancing around at the unfamiliar path. Lawana stepped closer, her bare feet making no sound against the damp earth. "Few men stray here," she murmured. "Fewer still return." Otto stiffened at the warning. He had heard the old tales, whispers of spirits dwelling in the rivers and hills, some benevolent, others vengeful. Yet, the woman before him did not seem like a creature of malice. "I mean no harm," he said. "I only wish to return home." She watched him for a long moment before turning away. "Follow me." She led him through a path that did not exist a moment before, the trees parting as if bending to her will. Otto walked beside her, stealing glances when he thought she would not notice. Her movements were fluid, unhurried, like a river flowing through its course. They reached a clearing bathed in silver light, where a lone tree stood with roots that twisted into the ground like ancient fingers. Otto felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. "This is a sacred place," Lawanu said, her voice carrying a note of sadness. "Few men have seen it." Otto frowned. "Why bring me here?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "Because you are different." The words sent a shiver through him, though he did not understand why. "I do not belong to your world," she continued, "nor you to mine. But for this moment we stand between them." Otto swallowed, his heart racing. He did not understand what she meant, not fully, but he felt it, an invisible thread binding them in a way beyond reason. "Will you help me return?" he asked. Lawana studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then with a small nod, she raised a hand. The mist thickened around them, swallowing the world whole. When it cleared, Otto stood at the edge of his village. He spun around, but the clearing was gone. The forest stretched endlessly, as though nothing had changed. But something had. Otto could still feel her presence lingering in the air, as though a part of him had remained with her in that sacred place. And in the nights that followed, when the wind whispered through the trees, he could hear her name carried in its breath. Lawanu. Otto brought Lawanu into the village under the cover of night, guiding her through the winding paths with careful steps. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood, the distant hum of voices carrying from the longhouses. Though his heart swelled with joy, he could not shake the weight of unease pressing against his chest. He had crossed a boundary unseen, bringing something sacred into a world that might not welcome it. Lawana moved beside him in silence, her presence delicate yet unshaken. She wore a simple shawl over her shoulders, its fabric dull compared to the luminous glow that once adorned her in the forest. Otto had warned her to remain unseen, at least until he could ease her presence into the lives of his people. But secrets did not stay buried in a village where whispers traveled faster than the wind. His mother, weary-eyed and sharp of tongue, sensed the change before he spoke a word. She studied Lawanu with quiet suspicion, noting the strange stillness in her movements, the way her gaze lingered too long on the flickering fire, as if she had never seen it before. Otto told her only what was necessary. This was his wife, a woman he had met while hunting, and she would live with him now. The old woman narrowed her eyes but said nothing. She knew better than to question a man's choice, though she kept a careful watch, waiting for truth to reveal itself. Days passed, and Lawanu remained an enigma. She spoke little to the villagers, her voice a whisper against the hum of daily life. Women glanced at her from the corners of their eyes, noting how she never joined in their cooking, how she touched nothing made of iron. Children, braver in their curiosity, played near her, drawn by the soft lilt of her voice when she spoke. Yet even they sensed the quiet strangeness that clung to her like morning mist. Otto saw none of this as reason for worry. To him, Lawanu was perfection, her every movement a dance, her presence a balm against the harshness of the world. He watched her with an awe that blinded him to the murmurs creeping through the village like ivy seeking cracks in stone. The elders spoke in hushed tones, recalling the old tales of spirits who walked among men, of unions that were never meant to be. The blacksmith, whose hands were always coated in soot and sweat, muttered that no woman should fear iron unless she belonged to something not of this world. The healer, a woman who had seen many things, warned that love bound by mystery often led to sorrow. The festival came with the full moon, a celebration that brought the village to life in a flurry of song and dance. Otto urged Lawanu to join, to step from the shadows and claim her place among his people. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around his wrist as she whispered, "There are things even love cannot change." But Otto would not hear of it. He pulled her into the throng, where firelight cast dancing shapes upon the ground, where laughter and the pounding of drums filled the night. He spun her into the rhythm, his joy infectious, his love blinding. For a moment, she let herself believe. Then came the iron. A group of young men, wild with drink, tossed rings of metal into the fire, a game meant to test one's bravery. One of them, half jealous of Otto's fortune, turned with a grin too sharp, and threw a small iron bangle toward Lawanu. She did not see it until it was too late. The moment the metal touched her skin, she gasped, a sharp, breathless sound that cut through the revelry. The air around her shimmered, as though the night itself recoiled. A cry rose from the crowd as Lawanu staggered back, her form flickering like a flame caught in the wind. Otto caught her before she fell, his arms tightening around her trembling body. But the damage was done. The villagers had seen. The whispers became shouts, the murmur of suspicion now a roar of certainty. "She is not one of us," someone spat. "A spirit," another breathed, fear laced in every syllable. The elders stepped forward, their faces grave. "What have you done, Otto?" Lawanu's fingers dug into his arm, her breath shallow. "We must go," she whispered. Otto turned, desperation clawing at his chest. "She is my wife," he said, his voice fierce. "She has done no harm." But fear is a hungry thing, and it had already sunk its teeth deep into the hearts of the people. The elders spoke with the weight of the past behind them. "You ask us to live alongside the unknown, to share our fires with what we do not understand." A choice had to be made. Lawanu's eyes, filled with sorrow, met Otto's. "They will never accept me." Otto's grip tightened. "Then we will leave." She gave him a small, aching smile. "Would you leave the world you have always known for me?" The question hung between them, heavy as the silence that followed. The river called to her. Lawanu stood at its edge, the water shifting in restless currents beneath the moonlight. Her body trembled, still weakened by the touch of iron. But it was not pain that held her still. It was sorrow. Behind her, the village burned with voices, their fear thick as smoke in the night air. Before her, the river shimmered with the promise of home, a world where she belonged but where Otto could not follow. Footsteps broke through the silence. "Otto!" He came to her as he always had, without hesitation, without fear. His chest rose and fell with the weight of unspoken words. His hands curled into fists at his sides, as though holding on to something slipping through his fingers. He had always been strong, unyielding like the earth beneath his feet, but now, standing before her, he looked lost. "They will not let us stay," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. His jaw tightened. "Then we will go." She turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his. "And where will we go, Otto? There is no place for me in your world." His hands found hers, warm and steady. Then I will follow you into yours. Luana's heart clenched. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine it. The two of them together, walking beyond the veil of the spirit world, his hand in hers as they disappeared into the mist. But it was a dream built on fragile ground. You are still bound to this world, she said, her fingers tracing the calloused lines of his palm. You have blood, breath, and a beating heart. If you cross into my world, you will never return. Otto did not flinch. I do not want to return. Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering like the stars above. You do not know what you are saying. He cupped her face, his touch reverent, as though memorizing every inch of her before she could slip away. I know that I love you. I know that without you, I will only be a shadow of myself. A sob caught in her throat. She wanted to believe him, to take his hand, and pull him into the river's depths, where the mortal world could never touch them again. But the spirits were not kind to those who did not belong. If he followed, he would fade, his essence lost in a realm not meant for the living. I cannot ask this of you, she said, voice breaking. You are not asking, he murmured. I am choosing. The water lapped at her ankles, calling her home. She looked once more at the village behind them, at the flickering fires, and the watching eyes hidden in the dark. She had tried to be part of their world, had dared to love beyond the bounds of what was permitted. And now, there was no place left for her, but the one she had come from. She exhaled, her breath mingling with the night air. Then choose now. Otto's grip on her tightened, his pulse strong beneath her fingertips. He had always been fearless, a man who walked the line between caution and recklessness. But now his certainty wavered. The river's voice grew louder, the mist curling around them like outstretched hands. She felt the moment he understood. His grip slackened, the choice settling between them like a stone sinking into deep water. He could not go with her. Not truly. And she could not stay. Luana reached up, pressing a final kiss against his lips, tasting the salt of her own tears. I will wait for you, she whispered. Then she stepped back. The river embraced her, swallowing her whole. The water rippled once, twice, and then it was still. She was gone. Otto fell to his knees at the edge, his breath ragged. The night stretched long and empty, the world unchanged and yet utterly broken. The village remained behind him, but it no longer felt like home. The river carried on before him, silent as the grave. He did not know how long he sat there, waiting for something, perhaps for the water to return her, perhaps for the earth to swallow him whole. But the river gave no answers, and the night stretched on. In the years that followed, the villagers would speak of Otto with quiet reverence. They would see him wandering the forests alone, his once bold steps now softer, his gaze always distant. He never took another wife, never spoke of the spirit woman who had once walked beside him. But on certain nights, when the wind was still and the river ran silver under the moon, some swore they heard a voice carried in the current, a song too soft to be mortal, calling a name that only he would ever answer. Otto never left the village, but when his time came, when his body grew old and his breath shallow, he did not fear the unknown. He walked to the river's edge one last time, knelt upon the earth, and let the water take him. And this time, the river did not return him,